Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six Podcast. This 6-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an unbelievable treat we have today. We could cover the accolades of our guest, but really where I want to start is where I don't think people give her enough credit, is living a life of intention. Kellie Sbrocchi is here. She is the host of the MissUnderstood Podcast, active naval service warfare officer, and just
HR officer.
Excuse me, HR officer.
HR officer, yes.
And is just an incredible human. Kellie, thank you so much for coming on the Got Your Six Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love that intro, intention. Yes, that is definitely like who I am in my core. So that is what I should start introducing myself as. Absolutely.
And that comes from having to handle a lot of different things that come at you. And you do have a lot that you enjoy doing, right? Again, we're going to go through the list. But how along the way do you find time to be intentional? Like what throughout the day, where do you stop and say, all right, hey, I'm maybe distracting because this isn't what I want to do. What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's actually a lot simpler than you might think. When something brings you joy, you prioritize it. Plain and simple. And it comes in all shapes and forms. It's working out. It's a good diet. It's walking your dog. It's going to the beach. Whatever that looks like. And I think where people find my social media or whatever more controversial is the way that I express my passions and find joy. It's in larger magnitudes. So it's social media, it's podcasting, pageantry, Miss California USA. Those are all things that bring me a ton of joy. So prepping for a pageant or doing a photo shoot or becoming a professional model, like I decided I would make time for those things in the evenings, on my Saturday mornings, whenever it fit in to my schedule, while the Navy always remained first. So that's really like, people are like, how do you do it all? It's because when it's important to you and it matters to you, you make it a priority in your schedule. And that's evolved as I've gotten into a relationship. Now I'm married, billets have changed, things like that. But ultimately, it's always what is a priority and what brings me joy. It fills my cup, so I'm going to keep doing it.
And when have you had to turn away from something when it's no longer filling your cup because life does change?
I was actually just reflecting on that today because I started my podcast in 2020, right after I'd finished pageantry. So when I was competing for Miss California USA, a lot of you don't see the behind the scenes. So this was pre-COVID. This was 2018, 2019. I prepped for over a year for Miss California. You're doing 2-a-days. You are doing walking training. I had a mental management coach. I had an interview coach, branding, social media, photo shoots. It takes hours of your life. So it was actually a joint decision with me and my now husband at the time. He was like, you should compete again. And I was like, well, do you know how much time that takes? Well, when the pageant was over, all of a sudden, that time is now free. There are free blocks where I'm no longer prepping for a pageant. And that's when I decided to dive into my podcast because I still wanted to do public speaking. It just was no longer going to be with the Miss California title. It was now just going to be Kellie Hall, and I was in control of that. So I decided to start my podcast. At the time, I was working in recruiting, and it was COVID, and we had no lives. So I had a lot more time to record podcasts. And I recorded 50 episodes in 1 year. I was on fire. Just two a week. Again, you were working from home, you're quarantined, you could record a lot more. Well, the billet I am in now, I'm a flag aide for an admiral here in Great Lakes. When I was nominated for the...
incredible. She is...
the best. You know
amazing.
her?
No,
literally the
never
best.
met.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's literally, 5 stars. Comes with amazing recommendations. So I actually didn't even know she was going to be my admiral, but I was nominated to interview by the HR community. And when I was exploring, they were like, you're going to have to move in 5 weeks. And I kept talking to mentors. They were like, one thing to keep in mind is all these passions are going to have to not just take a back seat, but go into a different car, because you will be an admiral's aide and everything is different. Your life will be different. Your time will be different. It will be spent different. You'll be traveling. So I really had to reflect on that. And I was okay with my podcast taking a backseat, but basically moving into a different car. I think I ended up recording like 10 episodes the first year I was a flag aide, but not abandoning it completely. So with my time, I was like, okay, I don't have as much time as I used to dive into my passions. The extra time I do have, I'm going to focus on Instagram and just keep that growing and building. And like, I will eventually get back to my podcast. So now I've figured out a little bit more of a balance. I'm kind of back to recording when I can, and I'm picking it up. So I didn't completely abandon it, but these things have different seasons. The chapters change over time, but you don't have to completely sacrifice it. You might just have to focus on something a little bit different. So yeah, that's probably the last time I really had to like restructure and reprioritize. But like I said, I didn't completely abandon it. I just kind of kept it above water, doing as many minimum episodes I could.
I love the analogies. And especially the part where you talked about, not being okay and recognizing, hey, this is still something I want to do and pursue. It's got to just be in a different way. And you see that whether it's in personally or in business, right? Where there's iterations over time, where a company will continue to iterate, and what started in version 1 is much different than version like 75. But along the way, you mentioned mentors, and anytime people put themselves out there, especially on the internet, the first thing somebody that thinks as they're looking to create content or whatever, they're going to say to themselves, oh, well, everyone's going to hate what I do and stuff like that. That's only really, and we talked about this before the podcast, it's really 5 to 10%. But you need to have this like group or board of advisors to bounce ideas off of. How do you continue to cultivate who that crew is and what ideas you're presenting to them?
So first, on that note, remember that the haters will always be louder than the lovers. And they are typically the ones that will speak out and write comments and whatever it is. But I have always found that to be kind of a turning point for me. Whenever people are just really upset with something that I'm doing or really against it, I'm always like, okay, let me stop and let me reflect. Is this too different? Is this too crazy? Is this a bad reflection of the Navy? Is this a bad reflection of me as an officer? I go through this checklist, right? And there have been times I'm like, correct. This is not maybe an indication of my character, or my husband likes to use the word brand. He'll be like, that's not really on brand for you. And I'm like, you're right. Not on brand for me. I'm going to pass this opportunity. But then there's other times, like when I decided to compete in my first pageant, I was like, why is this so different? And that was my first experience with cyberbullying. My headshot had gotten posted in a Navy Facebook group, and people were like, this is ridiculous, this is insulting, naval officers shouldn't be doing pageants, I will never take an officer seriously who is in a bikini and heels, like just berating me online. And I was like, wait a second, I truly don't understand why this is so different and crazy. Like, it doesn't change the fact of how much I care about my sailors or the mission or my integrity or my character.
To get here, integrity, right. Character, exactly.
If anything, this is going to make me better because it's super scary and I've never done this before. I have no idea what this looks like.
No one ever did it before, really,
right.
At that level.
Right, at that level. And that's what my peers were kind of saying. I had some that were like, well, Kellie, you're always going to be known as this person who competed in Miss California. Like, do you want that to follow you? And then at other peers that were like, I think you need to stay true to who you are, and we know you, and we know your intention, and you just want to showcase that women can do both, and that you're really feminine and you're outgoing, and do it. But ultimately, I always had senior officers that have supported me. So anytime I felt a little bit crazy, there has been a CO or a senior officer telling me, go for it. And that's something that people don't know. And when I did my first pageant, my commanding officer, she was like, hell yes. We love it. We're telling Navy recruiting. We're telling public affairs. Like, and I was a Lieutenant JG. So even now with my social media, I have senior officers. Actually, I'm gonna be candid. Okay, we're gonna be candid on this podcast.
We're on the Got Your Six podcast. That's what you need to do. That was part of coming
right
on the
here,
show.
live on the podcast. I'm gonna tell you a story. And when I was at the Army Navy game back in December, 2 months ago, you know, like we said, we get this polarizing. You know, is it too different? Is it wrong? People love it. People hate it. I'm at the Army Navy game and I see the CNO, and I'm like, oh, even as an aide, I've never met him. I'm like, oh, I really want to go up to him and like take a selfie.
So
I like kind of hover.
You got to talk about who that is, because not everybody on the audience
knows.
Oh,
the Chief of Naval Operations, the highest ranking person in the Navy. 4-star, highest ranking person. He's the man. He is the person that directly corresponds to the President of the United States. What he says goes, period. Everyone's boss, essentially, in the Navy. So I see Admiral Gilday, and I'm like, you know what? I just want to go up to him and take a selfie. Like, there's no shot he knows who I am or whatever. So there was like a couple people around him, some sailors, like got some quick selfies. I waited for the right time, and then I walk up to him and I was like, hey, sir, do you mind if I take a selfie with you? It's such an honor to meet you. And I'm like, big fan. And he turns around and he goes, hi, I know who you are. And I'm like, my eyes just get so wide. He goes, I've seen your videos on Instagram, right? And I'm like, yes, sir. And he goes, yeah, I saw the one with the Thanksgiving food. That was funny stuff. That was fun. You're funny. And I was like, thank you, sir. And he goes, we need more people like you. You were out there inspiring people. Keep inspiring. And he sticks out his hand and he gave me his coin. And I literally turned around and like started crying. I was like, I was like, wait, I get challenged every other week on my role and my purpose and what I'm doing, if it's okay. And I just got all the validation I needed that the CNO wants me to keep inspiring and doing what I'm doing. So again, to backtrack, behind me have been mentors, peer and senior, who are like, no, Kellie, I know a lot of people are saying it's wrong. I'm telling you, it's okay. And we need people like you who are different to keep going. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll be that person. And so that's just a little bit of a tea for you. I haven't told anyone else besides my husband.
Chills, Kellie.
Yeah.
Literal
I keep
chills.
his coin on my mirror every morning when I wake up. I look at his coin now because I'm like, okay, keep inspiring, you know? It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And like, I think there's something to be said, because like people will say that's weird or wrong, but it's different, right? Because you're literally trailblazing. And when you're doing that, it's going to solicit things like, that's not how it's done. Well, that's not how it was done in the past. Here we are today.
Right.
So as you constantly look at making sure your cup is full of joy and you're fulfilling there's fulfillment in there, you're also and this is what I absolutely respect and think you are just awesome for, is you're constantly reaching back and pulling people forward with you. Like, you're this consummate connector of finding people and connecting them together. And we haven't really kind of talked about that before, because you think like, oh, you're at the top, you're going to kind of protect your territory. It's like, no, I want people to go farther than me.
Yeah.
How do you kind of go about that when people reach out like, hey, I'm kind of going through this, or I got this thing going on. You're like, wait a second, I can, this person together. Or what does that look like?
First of all, it gives me chills that you say that, because it's the fact that you recognize that. It, again, tells me that I'm doing something right somewhere, because I don't talk about it all that often, or I don't post about it all that often, but that's exactly why I do what I do. I'm very open about how I want to be the mentor that I wish I had had when I first entered the Naval Academy, or when I first entered the Navy. And it comes with many faces, but one of those is I truly didn't see women who looked or acted like me. And I come from a military family. My dad's been in the Navy for 34 years. I watched him put on a uniform my entire life, and I still didn't consider military service. never.
Yeah.
Because just the plain simple fact that I was super girly, I was really feminine, I had outside interests, I was in yearbook, I did media, I was the anchor of my school news. Like, I did all of these things, none of which I associated with military service. And the only reason why I applied to the Naval Academy is because my parents essentially forced me to. They were like, it's 40 minutes up the road. It's basically an in-state school. Like, just apply to it. And then they had kind of like a master plan as to how to get me there eventually. But I was so fearful. The night before I left for induction day, I was like, Mom, like, what if I literally don't make any friends? She was like, what do you mean? I was like, what? I'm just the weird girl that's really outgoing and bubbly, that's spunky and like likes to have a full face of makeup on. And she was like, Kellie, I promise there will be people there like you. And she was right. It was my roommate, Jackie Barnum.
Jackie, another just absolute
rock star. Yeah.
Rock star.
So right away I had an ally, but we've kind of, been on this journey together that there's still such a limited group of women out there who have outside passions or, a desire to be super feminine or are really bubbly or are different leadership styles. Now you are going to face young women out in the world who want to be multi-passionate. There's not many people who are like, I definitely want to enter a career where that's the only thing I do. Blank.
Those days are long gone for everybody.
That's just not the reality.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like the today's youth are so talented, they're so creative, they're so bright, they're smarter than all of us. And so I think I want to be that representation for them because they're like, wait, she's active duty, she's an HR officer, she works full time, but she also does blank. Wait, like I could do that too. I don't have to sacrifice the things that bring me joy and my outside passions to be in military service. If anything, military service can amplify all of those things. And that's exactly what, I am realizing day to day. I'm like, every day I serve in the Navy, it's amplifying everything I'm doing. I'm becoming a better person. I'm becoming a better leader. But they're really tangential. I'm using my experience to talk on my podcast and influencing, and they're happening at the same time. So like I said, I appreciate that you recognize that because I'm like, there's no purpose in what I'm doing if it's not to circle back and teach and train and mentor those who are coming behind me, because they're the ones that are coming up next, and they need to see people like us who are exploring all of these passions and these alternate opportunities.
No, 1,000%. What I think is really cool is as we start to go deeper into your story, you see that a lot of what you're doing now was planted well before, right? Being the news anchor, doing yearbook, so all the media, all that was already there, and it, over time, again through iteration, continues to come out. I think there was a story that you mentioned when you first went to the Naval Academy for your recruiting trip, and that's where you kind of got challenged. Do you want to talk about that real briefly? When you were with the track and field team?
Oh my goodness, there's so many different stories. Is this the story where they told me I couldn't wear makeup, or they told me like
you had like Princeton, you had all these other schools that you had been accepted to?
Oh,
and you
yeah,
were like,
yeah. Okay, I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements lately, and one of them is whenever I talk about my high school track team, they like told me not to wear makeup and whatever. So that's what I thought you were talking about.
Oh, good.
No, so and we'll get into that in a second. But I was being recruited to run at different colleges, and my dad was like my manager, like reaching out to all these colleges and everything. But
kind
point blank, I didn't have
in the family dining room table. Yeah,
mailing them out, all that. But to be completely frank, I didn't have money for college. It was up to me to figure out how to pay for college. So my ticket was track. I was like, I'm going to get a track scholarship. I'm going to get a full ride. I was running my face off in high school, quite literally. I was running quick. And I'd gotten to like a state level to be recognized in Virginia. So I thought my future was sealed. And then as I started going to different colleges on these recruiting visits, I realized a couple things. One, track scholarships don't pay for full rides. You're not a football player. So they were offering like 10% off my tuition, running my fastest times ever. And I was like, wait a second, what? Like, if I break 5 minutes in the mile, you're still only paying 8% of my tuition at Mississippi State? Like, that's wild. Another thing was, through all these visits, everything kind of started to like look the same. everything was really beautiful, and the locker rooms were really glamorous, and the parties were right down the street, and like, you know, all looked very like fun and fancy and wonderful. But then I went to the Naval Academy, and it was my very, very last visit, and it stood out because it was different. You know, the students were different. The midshipmen walked around different. The classes were harder. They were asking inquisitive questions. I mean, the fact that the students were even there was different than the other universities. You know, like they were not even just going, but they were prepared and they were excited to learn something difficult. But ultimately, you could tell that they were different kind of people preparing to be different kind of people. And so on the last day, we had like a dinner with all the rest of the recruits, and I talked to the track captain, and I asked her, how did you decide? You know, you're a firstie at the Naval Academy. How did you make this decision to go to the Naval Academy? And she said that she had been recruited to run at Penn State and then also the Naval Academy. And she knew what her life would probably look like if she'd gone to Penn State, graduate, got her business degree, left, all of that. But she had no idea what her life would look like if she went to the Naval Academy. And if she didn't do it, she'd always look back and wonder, what if? And so I was sitting there as a 17-year-old in Pussers, listening to her say this, and I was like, I'm going to have to go to the Naval Academy. I am just the kind of person that's always going to want to do like the hardest, most difficult thing and then prove that I can do it to myself. And if I don't, I'm always going to look back and like wonder, like, what if I'd gone to the Naval Academy? What if I became a naval officer? Like, what would my life be like? And no regrets. That's literally why I went. And that's also why I've made so many decisions along the way. Because I'm like, what if I don't do Miss USA? Would I look back at my life and wonder, what if? What if I don't start a podcast? Like, and all of those things end with, I think I'm going to look back and wonder, what if I had done that? And so then I know I have to do it and I have to try. And I have failed. I didn't make it to Miss USA, and I was runner-up at Miss California, and, you know, I haven't been... Real quick,
though, right? You were runner-up for the state of California.
Correct. Yes.
Right? Like, when you have setbacks, when you put yourself out there, you're still winning.
Right. And a lot of people, I think, are fearful because maybe they don't want to fail, but they don't realize that you are going to learn so much more about yourself in the process, and then you'll analyze, and then you'll assess, and then you'll keep going, and you'll be better for it. And so that's why people are probably so annoyed on social media, like, we get it, we used to do Miss California or whatever, but I'm like, okay with being a famous face of failure. Because I'm going to show up and keep trying and be the best I can because I'm a human being. And not everything in life is going to work out exactly the way that you hoped it would be, but your response is completely in your control.
Bingo. And that's 90% of it.
Yeah.
That's 90%.
It really is.
As we talk about failure, setbacks, whatever we want to label them as in the moment, right? Where ultimately has a setback led to your greatest success? Which one? At any point
definitely my greatest failure was, I see it, it's definitely a failure to me. Was not being able to get my SWO pen and fulfill my obligation in my first tour as a surface warfare officer. And I had a really, really hard time when I first entered the Navy. I really struggled. I struggled with my leadership. I struggled with my identity. I struggled with my medical issues. I was facing a lot of medical issues at the time, didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was also struggling with the culture in which they had expectations of how ensigns should be when they report to their ship and how smart they should be and how much they should do this and X, Y, and Z. And I was not fitting that mold. And then I was being told I need to act one way, and then also being told I wasn't performing well enough, and then also battling personal issues. And all of that failure led to me being medically separated from my ship. And I was faced with an option to go HR or get out of the Navy. And I had the smallest percentage to get accepted for HR. I was basically told, like, have your resume ready because you're an ensign. They're not going to pick you. You're grossly underqualified. It's really hard to get into HR. And so I hustled and I called people in the HR community and I was like, tell me about your community. What can I do? And I found a mentor who was like, my recommendation is that you connect with as many senior HR officers as possible. And you show up in their office and you tell them why you are the next best thing to enter the HR community of the Navy. And maybe they will write a letter of recommendation for you. Maybe. And so I was like, I went to the Naval Academy to be a naval officer, to be a leader. And a lot of people will take that opportunity and jump out. They'll be like, ooh, free college. Thanks. See you later. I'm off to go work for Amazon. For me, I was like, I still want to do this and I have a fortitude to serve. So I'm going to give it my best shot. And I hustled that summer of 2015, connected with as many HR officers in San Diego I could. And I was one of 3 selected at the board for human resources. And that was like my lease on life. Like, that's what I look back. I was like, this is my new lease on life. This is my second chance. I had my medical stuff under control. I had my diagnoses, and they were sending me to Columbus, Ohio to work in recruiting. And I truly feel like because I failed so much in that first year and a half, I have never taken a day for granted since. Like, I really, like, I'm like, I get to be in the Navy. I love what I do. I still get to serve. I'm going to be the best HR officer I can be. Like, I truly do. Like, I'm like, how can I grow? How can I learn? How can I make this community better? How can I make the Navy better? Like, and it haunts me every day. Every day I have to go up to someone new and they go, where's your warfare device? And I have to, be like, oh, well, I'm an HR officer, and like, I'm prior to, well, I have to always have that conversation, which is like really annoying because it's kind of like going through a breakup. You don't want to always talk about like your past. Like, you don't want to like have that reminder every day, or that's what people focus about online. They can't recognize anything I'm doing 9 years into my service as a lieutenant in the Navy, up for 04, because they still want to focus on what I did as an ensign, what I failed at as an ensign, or the struggles I faced as an ensign who was a baby, who knew nothing. So I look back and I'm like, I thought I was at my lowest point then, which I do feel like I was. And I will spend the rest of my career fighting and trying to be better and the best officer I could be, because I remember what it feels like to feel like you're losing. And I don't want to do that. And I want to be a good example for those people who face hardship and face challenges and face failure. They can come back. They can be better than ever. They can be stronger than ever. But they can recognize that they still have something to give. They still have a talent to utilize. And I think that's something in the military that because we act different or look different, or maybe our job is different, they see it as unimportant. And that's just not true.
I mean, we could end the show right there. But I do have one final question, because that was amazing. That's just, we're going to put that on a loop. That's a hype. So with all that being said, all the talents that you've been able to pull out of that from that moment and continue to use that as leverage to go forward, Kellie, how are you better today than yesterday?
I think through every experience, I'm learning something about myself. And then in turn, I'm figuring out how to use that as a way to make the world better. Like how to uplift other people, how to encourage other people. I found through pageantry, it was literally because I competed in Miss USA, they really empower you to have a personal brand. So that's the whole reason I started speaking out on social media. I took my account off private because I was like, if I want to be Miss USA, I have to start speaking out on social media. This whole military platform, this has all been by accident. I wasn't like, I'm going to join the Navy and be an influencer. It was because people were like, hey, what you're posting resonates with me. What you're sharing resonates with me. So again, through all of these experiences, I'm learning like, wait, I have a talent, or I have an ability that I can use to uplift people and inspire people. And that is what we should all, I think, continue to assess as we move forward. Like, I'm a God girl. I believe in God. So I don't think that these talents and skills are selfish. I think that I have them to empower and uplift other people. And so as I continue to experience new things and find things out about myself and face failure and pick myself up, I'm becoming a better person through the process. And if you think you're never going to fail again, you're never going to say the wrong thing again, never going to do the wrong thing again, like that's not true. I messed up on Saturday. I said the wrong thing to my boss, and I was like, damn it. Like 2 years of being a flag aide and I'm still messing up. And I marinated all day about it. I was like, I should know better. But I'm like, okay, moving forward, like don't say this, don't do this, and like be more on top of it in this way. So we're just going to keep picking ourselves up and figuring it out. I think it's important not to make the same mistake twice, especially not 3 times. But like I said, every day we're figuring out how to improve ourselves and reflect on it. It's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. There was something intentional that happened there. Reflect on that and then continue doing it. And you're going to improve yourself, but you're also going to improve the people around you.
And Kellie, you've given us a lot to reflect on this episode. Where can people go to learn more about you and the MissUnderstood podcast?
Yes. So I'm only on Instagram, at kellie.sbrocchi. I'm there. I always check my DMs every single day and respond back to followers. And you can find my podcast anywhere where you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, most recently YouTube, and my MissUnderstood.podcast account on Instagram as well. That's where you can find me. I love to connect.
Yes, she does. Yeah, I mean, this is proof. We'll make sure both of those are linked in the show notes for this episode. Kellie, thank you so much for sharing your strategies, your methods, your tactics, and most importantly, thanks for having our 6. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.